We just took on a huge challenge. Okay, welcome back to Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. Right now, we are going to pivot to another area of workforce. We're going to address our nurses. And to address S-277, we welcome to our committee Senator Martine Gulick. It is a total pleasure to have you here. And would you be kind enough to introduce your bill and introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and Committee. I am Senator Martine Gulick from the Chittenden Central District. This bill, some might call a mandatory, a ban on mandatory overtime for nurses. I'd like to call it safe hours for safe care because that's what it's all about.
It needed to be like your statement of what the name of the bill is.
Safe hours for safe care. The idea of this bill came to me from a few constituents who are either work as a nurse or are, related to someone who works as a nurse. And this particular gentleman, he was concerned about his girlfriend and her experience as a Vermont nurse who would work these 12-hour shifts, get a relatively short break, and then have to work again. And she was concerned that these long hours were having an effect on the quality of care that she was providing. As you all know, nurses are incredible professionals who take their patient care as their primary responsibility, but they are human. And we all know that sleep is incredibly vital to mental acuity, not to mention physical stamina. So if this is an issue, having lived with someone who works in the airline industry, there are very clear guidelines to how many hours you can fly, and then you need a certain amount of a rest period before you can fly again. This is, sort of same idea because you've got the safety of human beings in your hands. 18 states have laws that ban or strictly limit mandatory overtime for many nurses, and a small group of states go further by requiring a defined rest period after long shifts. So an 8 to 10 hours off after a 12-hour work shift, for example. And then there are states with explicit minimum rest between shifts for nurses. So, and I can provide you with all this information if you'd like. Among these states, a few write a specific off-duty period into law after long shifts, directly addressing 12 hours, then call back to same-day scenarios. Illinois, for example, after working 12 hours, a nurse must receive 8 hours of rest before the next shift. Maine, after working 8 hours, 8 consecutive hours, a nurse must receive 10 hours off. New Hampshire, after working 12 hours, a nurse must receive 8. West Virginia, for shifts of 12 hours or longer, nurses must receive 8 hours of rest after the shift. And then one other I'll mention is Oregon. The general rule for all employees of at least 8 hours between shifts, providing a 12-hour nurse shift cap. And it guarantees minimum rest period in most cases. So the bill itself, as you can see, it would prohibit hospitals and long-term care facilities in Vermont from requiring nurses to work mandatory overtime, except in limited emergency situations. Its stated goals are to protect patient safety, safeguard nurses' health, and improve working conditions. I'd be happy to continue, or I can let counsel.
I think Sophie is happy to let you go back to health and welfare, where you're doing all sorts of important work.
We are. Yes.
But if we have questions from our team before we move to Sophie, let's ask.
Well, I wasn't trying to ignore the introduction. It's just that this was one of the first bills we did 16 years ago. So I'm hoping to hear from Sophie, like what we did or didn't do. And we had discussed even a cap on what you could volunteer for, because, people are kind of told, like, we need you to volunteer for this,
Right.
And how to make it all work. So I feel like we've had this discussion like every 4 years forever.
Yeah, we'll find out from Sophie.
And I'm trying to figure out what if there's no oversight and that's why you're getting a complaint, or we haven't quite gotten it right. So
Also, I would just tag on nurses. What about doctors? I mean, I'm sorry, residents who've been up for 16 hours. I think to do nurses without doing doctors as well, it does seem a little
Yeah.
pointless.
Yeah,
So,
I think the residents that brought this up, like the new SEIU.
Yes.
but we haven't acted.
yeah, we've talked about that a
Right.
while there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think, any other questions from our team before we move to Sophie?
And
Many, wow,
we'll wait
okay,
and see if we get to the next week.
Okay,
great.
great.
Well, I hope you support this. I will watch the testimony online at a later date. But
When she's not sleeping, which you should be doing as a legislator, because we need good sleep to
Yeah.
deal
exactly,
with life here in the state house every
Yeah.
day.
yeah. All right, well, let me know how I can support you all with this
Great.
bill.
Thank
And
thank you very much.
come back. Thank you so much.
Martine, thanks for introducing it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank
And
you.
it's just a reminder, what goes around comes around.
I know.
And Sophie, if you'd be kind enough to join us, that'd be great.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
State. law. Got winnowed down
Oh, that's
to the
typical
state facility.
state hospital. Sophie, is that me? Well,
So Sophie Zadatny for the Office of Legislative Counsel. And I will say up front, I'm not aware of what you did 16 years ago. I
Okay.
can certainly look into it. There's nothing right now, as far as I'm aware, in statute.
Well, then I'm glad we're doing this. Nice. That is maybe it died in the Senate.
well, 16
Such a
years
hard
ago,
cop.
we both blamed the Senate for inaction. Yeah,
Well, with that said, is there any comparable bill for any
other
other type of
Sector.
profession?
So right now, there is a short form bill in the House.
No. Actual law, not.
But pilots have a federal requirement. Is that not true?
So
We talked about
there's the, for medical students, medical residents, there is the Accreditation Council on Graduate Medical Education. That, so there was what was called the Libby Sign Law that came out in the 1980s involving a Bennington student in New York who died, and there was an investigation into her death, and it was concluded it was due in part to the fact that the physicians that were treating her were just exhausted. And so her father was I believe a plaintiff's lawyer, filed a lawsuit. And so there was laws passed. And again, where that landed up is on graduate medical education and making sure that sort of restricting the number of hours that medical students and residents can work.
So we have that in place currently.
So that's federal.
That's federal.
In order to be accredited as a medical school, you need to meet the requirements, and one of the accreditation requirements is around hours that can be that they can work.
When we take this up next, if we could have that, because it does strike me
Okay.
that nurses and doctors should be aligned on this. It seems crazy if they're not aligned, given they're doing similar things. Okay,
All right. You're okay.
but I think the other, that's a good key question, is that the other professions that where we may, or may not limit overtime for public safety, for human safety. I mean, I think that's a question, because you could probably argue the same thing about our professional firefighters, our professional police, legislators.
So we
Goes without saying, legislators.
Imagine the damage we could do with that sleep.
So this was one of the questions of this bill. This was one of the first bill requests that I received. And there was a question as to where it should go. Should it go into one of the titles involving healthcare, or should it go into labor and employment? And I did a deep dive, and I'm happy to share that with you. I mean, Senator Kulik mentioned 18 states. I went through all the 18 states, their statutes, what they provide, and they're kind of split 50-50 as to where they put these laws. Do they put them in their healthcare provisions? Do they put them in their labor provisions? Because there isn't really anything comparable in Vermont under the healthcare provisions,
Might as well do it here.
we decided to put it under labor. There are a number of other bills. You have one on the wall involving overtime for professional firefighters. So one thought is that right now the section this would go under in Title 21 is called minimum wage, and it covers minimum wages and overtime, but it's not included in the language in this bill, but one thought would be just to change the title to minimum wage and overtime, and then just keep any profession specific.
And then we can do
Overtime
both
laws.
at the same time. In fact, we can do both bills in the same breath. Yeah, of
So do I have your permission to share my screen?
course.
Okay.
You're already up there. So
So is it large enough for you? Or-
be a tiny bit bigger. Yeah. Oh, Thank you.
So Senator,
Okay, great.
yeah, Senator Goulart mentioned a couple of the things that I was going to mention, around, there's no federal prohibition on overtime for nurses. There is, a federal law that was, proposed law that was introduced in Congress in March 2024 called the Nurse Overtime and Patient Safety Act. And as far as I can tell, there was also a similar bill on the House side. It hasn't moved, which I suppose it's not surprising right now at the congressional level. There are 18 states that do have limits on overtime. The state laws vary, but they set limits on maximum shift, the amount of required rest periods, and then a definition of emergency exceptions. And so some of the common exceptions are around, you know, if you're in the middle of a surgery, there's a catastrophic mass casualty
Right.
event, those kinds of things. And then the definitions as to which employers and employees are covered also varies by state. So we'll get into the definitions in this one, but just so you're aware there, you know, that may be something for the committee to think about, is which employers should be covered and which employees should be covered. So,
And this bill doesn't specify that?
yes, it does.
Okay.
All right, so the first section is talks about policy. And again, the goal here is to promote patient safety, protect the health of nurses, improve working conditions in hospitals and long-term care facilities. So this would cover hospitals and long-term care facilities and cover nurses providing direct patient care or clinical services to patients by prohibiting mandatory overtime. So the employer is again a hospital or a long-term care facility, and then the definitions of hospital and long-term care facility are the ones that are currently in statute. So B2 at the bottom of page 1 has the definition of a hospital. Okay.
So it could be clinic, it could be
Yeah, so the definition is a place devoted primarily to the maintenance and operation of diagnostic and therapeutic facilities for inpatient medical or surgical care of individuals who have an illness, disease, injury, or physical disability, or for obstetrics that's licensed or required to be licensed, and then under Title 18. And then long-term care facility covers residential care homes, nursing homes, assisted living residences, homes for persons who are terminally ill, or therapeutic community residences. And again, that references Title 33 and the definition in there. The definition of mandatory overtime means work required of a nurse by an employer in excess of an agreed upon predetermined regularly scheduled shift, but in no case shall it be more than 12 hours in any 24-hour period or 48 hours in any work week. And again, I just a flag here for nurse, the definition under subsection 5 is a registered nurse or a licensed practical nurse. The definition's in Title 26. Title 26 also has a definition for advanced practice registered nurses. So this does not include advanced practice registered nurses.
what is that?
You know.
We
So-
would hope that all nurses were advanced in their practice.
But this is a particular designation. It's a particular, I guess, qualification that you have. So again, in some states, they have broader definitions of the employees that are covered. Some are narrower, some exclude for some reason nurse anesthetists. So again, this is something for the committee to hear from in terms of what nurses should be covered. But right now it covers registered nurses and licensed practical nurses. And then on-call time is the time spent by a nurse who's not working, but is compensated for being available. So often, you know, being on call means, you know, we don't need you right now, but you need to be nearby, available to come in if we need you. And then the prohibition, in subsection C, no nurse shall be required to work mandatory overtime A nurse may not be disciplined for refusing to work in excess of an agreed upon predetermined, regularly scheduled shift, but may be disciplined for refusing to work mandatory overtime if any of the exceptions to the prohibition, which we're going to get to next, apply. So this language says may. I just wanted to flag that, and that may not be disciplined. And again, you know, I don't know if you want to change that to shall not be disciplined, or some language that's more forceful than may. Right now, it's just that parallel construction of may not be disciplined, but may be disciplined. So getting into subsection D, these are the lists of the exceptions. And again, these are pretty standard compared to the ones that are being used nationally. So the first one is if a federal, state, or local state of emergency has been declared. 2, if the nurse is actively engaged in an ongoing medical or surgical procedure and the continued presence of the nurse through the completion of the procedure is necessary to the health and safety of the patient. And then 3 is an unforeseen disaster or other catastrophic event occurs that substantially affects or increases the need for healthcare services. And then it goes on to provide a definition of that. So it's one that does not occur regularly, that increases the need for nurses to provide safe patient care and could not be prudently anticipated by the employer. And then it specifically states, this does not include situations in which the employer fails to have sufficient nursing staff to meet the usual and predictable nursing needs of its patients. So that was something that came through looking nationally, was making sure that there isn't a, you know, I think that it reflects that there are shortages of nurses nationally. And so mandatory overtime is being used to fill the gaps. And these laws are intended to prevent hospitals from, you know, requiring people to work these excessively long shifts because of nursing shortages. So
But
subsection.
that is going to be our biggest challenge and pushback, is that we are in a workforce. And not, I wouldn't necessarily use the crisis, but close to, hence our dependence on traveling nurses, hence our dependence on overtime. And it will be, you know, that there's a balancing act that we're all going to have to do. All of us do in our lives between really strong life needs, keeping a hospital open, keeping a ward open, and somebody's work time. So I think this is going to be a crux of some of our challenge right here.
So subsection E requires that hospitals, long-term care homes make a good faith effort. If an employer determines that an exception exists, then the employer shall make a good faith effort to meet the staffing need through voluntary overtime or calling in per diems and agency nurses before requiring mandatory overtime. So it is recognizing that you have these other avenues you can use before you require people to come in.
Right. But still.
Subsection F at the top of page 4, on-call time. So again, if somebody's on call, they're not actually working, but they're available, they're being compensated for being available. That doesn't count towards the 12-hour shift. And then
Until they get.
right. And then the subsection G, voluntary overtime. So again, a nurse can voluntarily agree to work overtime. H, off duty, and this is again what Senator Gulick was referring to. Any nurse who works more than 12 consecutive hours must be allowed at least 10 consecutive hours off duty immediately following the worked overtime. And I did just want to, she mentioned what in some other states, the ones that I saw that had the longest shifts there were a couple of states that allowed like up to 14 hours. But again, 12 hours was pretty much the standard length of maximum amount of time somebody could work on a shift. Subsection I provides that nothing in this section shall be construed to limit, alter, or modify the terms, conditions, or provisions of a collective bargaining agreement entered into between an employer and a labor organization representing nurses. So I am aware, for example, that UVM Medical Center, their collective bargaining agreement does prohibit mandatory overtime, so that is already in their contract.
And how many, do you have a rough guess of how many of our nurses are in that union around the state? Is it only UVM?
I'm just aware of UVM Medical Center. I don't know about the other hospitals. I'm sure. that
I thought the union, the nurses union was statewide, it's just one facility.
I'm just aware of that contract. So,
So the union contract already in its AFT, I can't remember the nurses.
yeah, AFT.
AFT, right. So the nurses union already prohibits.
Right. And if they say except for an emergency, they don't define what an emergency is in the collective bargaining agreement, which is different than here. At least it spells out what the kind of emergency would be that would justify having somebody come in. So section 2, this provides for a report on mandatory overtime for nurses. So again, this requires, and again, there's a balancing act here between the Department of Labor is responsible for enforcing overtime and minimum wage laws, and then the Department of Health obviously has oversight of the hospitals and the long-term care facilities. So this proposes that employers will report all instances of mandatory overtime and the circumstances requiring its use to the Department of Health, and then this should be included in the report. So an explanation for the use of the overtime and then any applicable exception, and then the good faith efforts that the employer undertook to avoid needing to require people to come in. And then again, we're on page 5, subsection B. Those reports would be subject to inspection and copying, but any personally identifiable information would be redacted. And then subsection C would require employer to post in a conspicuous place a printed notice of the requirements of the chapter, the subchapter, i.e. the mandatory overtime prohibition. And then section 3 gets into the investigation of complaints. Again, this would be by the Commissioner of Labor, which currently has authority to investigate complaints relating to minimum wage and overtime. And it provides in subsection B a sliding scale for violations. So from $1,000 for the first violation up to $2,000 for the third and any subsequent violations. And then if an employer fails to report, which is what's in section 389, the fine would be $500 for that. And again, I can share with you if the committee's interested what other states do. There's just enormous variety in terms of violations. So some of them, Alaska is 25,000, but they have a sliding scale of reprimands for $25,000. California, $50 per employee, up to $100 per employee. New Hampshire, $2,500 for a willful violation. New York, 1,000 to 3,000 for violations within a 12-month period. So that, again, that's just a huge range of penalties.
That's also a challenge because our hospitals have no money. I mean, except for UVM. I mean,
And then this provides that it would take effect July 1 of 2026.
Minnie, any questions for Sophie? Thank you. David.
No, I just, if we continue, we tee this up for testimony, certainly hearing from nurses, the unions, et cetera.
And we'll also, I think, tee it up with firefighters. And I think your suggestion of doing this in our labor statutes with minimum wage and overtime, doing that together makes sense. Because then it's clearer for future legislators. I would appreciate your finding out what happened with this. If we could just do a little legislative dig on what happened to this bill. Because both of us remember it, actually. She served on House General, I did.
Okay.
So,
Can someone also provide the 18 states and a matrix of what they do and do not?
I think so.
You already have.
I'm a complete nerd, so yes.
She already had it.
One already. I will send it to the
It'd be kind enough to send that to
Yes.
me so that those of us who are as geeky as you are about these kind of this important. I mean, it's important for us to know. But thank you for digging so deep, Sophie. It's just your prep is just incredible. So I really appreciate it. You must have been an academic or involved in academics.
Married to an academic.
The grant testimony in each area, I'm assuming you'll be providing also comfort testimony, in other words, management from hospitals.
Randy, that's our job, is to provide balanced testimony on this stuff. Yeah, and ideas for that would be great because it's not just UVM builders. Yeah.
Can we have a check of, take a look? we're in the middle of a healthcare problem, healthcare cost problem. And this may exacerbate that condition, but, you know, it's just one potential side effect. Wondering if JFO do a short summary.
Absolutely. Have you talked to Nolan at all about this?
No, I mean, they're aware of it, but I haven't,
So let's ask Nolan if he's able to weigh in on this at the moment and the impact, because clearly there are some hospitals function with unions with, and some hospitals may already be compliant with this just because it serves them by having help. So we will hear from the hospitals, we will hear from the union, we will hear from nurses.
And
And
the hospitals, you just simply ask them the question, how much free time did you pay nurses? They're put their lives out.
Well, and how much do you use that, or do you have an agreement about time off? I mean, they may.
Yeah.
So, I think this is an interest, I have interest in doing this with the Send the Firefighters. I'm glad to know that I would love to hear, Sophie, what the agreement is federally for the doctors, because I think it ought to be, I thought whatever we do for nurses and firefighters should be aligned with doctors.
yeah, that may be, I don't know about doctors per se, I just know about graduate medical education, accreditation requirements.
Well, that's where they're most abused, is in their
Right,
residencies,
so-
internships.
And again, it may be, you know, I know there's federal accreditation of hospitals, so I don't know if there's anything in there about that, but I can check with our.
But I think it'd be
Healthcare
good to know what it is, so that
Right.
we don't do something that's. I think they should be aligned if we can.
Well, I mean, again, the concern would be if you, as a state, required something different for, say, medical residents, that would then mean we only have one medical school in the hospital in the state, you wouldn't want to be in a position where it loses its
Those on the
accreditation.
east side are served by residents on the east side,
Right, but who may not be impacted by.
right? But it would just be good to know.
Right.
If this bill is requiring more time off, less time off, I'd just like to see it aligned. David, another thought? Okay, great. This is terrific. We are going to go offline because we are going to take a break for 15 minutes, and then we're going to address the new federal challenges and opportunities we have with the federal government and our cannabis laws. So we're going to be hearing from Tucker, Anderson, and Pepper. So off